for an education program at the Tampa Bay Times, and I am also the president of our statewide Florida Press Educational Services group. So I kind of wanted to find out a little bit about you guys before I get started. If you don't mind putting in the chat where you're from and what you, if you work in a library, if you are a media specialist, if you are a teacher, that would be great. And and while you're doing that, I'm going to share my screen. Oh, and now I've lost the chat box. Excellent. We have a variety. That is great. So I don't know what, oops. I don't know what the weather is like where you all are. I am in sunny, humid, heat obsessed Florida. So I know we're all in different areas. Some of the stuff I'm going to talk about is a little bit specific to Florida, but in general, the information can be used anywhere. So please feel free to put questions in the chat. If I can figure out how to fix my little chat screen, there we go. Oh, and also I wanted to let you know that I am recording this so that we can have the information for future people. If you don't want your face on the recording, although I don't know if you can see faces on the recording, but if you don't want your face on the recording, of course, you can have your camera off. So this is just a little introduction. Sorry, I'm having problems with my screen here. This is just a little introduction to TPS Fest. This is my first time actually participating in this, so I'm very excited. I participated in the Sources Conference at the University of Central Florida, but I've never done the TPS conference before. So again, if you are looking for any way to participate or connect, there is a link right there for you to click. Just a few, oh, here's the link again, just a few reminders. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We do have, Lewis is monitoring the chat for us, and I'm fine with you asking questions as they come up if you would like. Okay. So this is a little about me. I already told you the top two things. Basically, I've been an educator since about 1990. I started when I was 12, though, so don't do the math to figure out how old I am. I've also been writing curriculum programs for newspaper and education programs since about 2000. And then in my spare time, I am an adjunct English professor at St. Leo University in Hillsborough College. And one of the reasons I bring that out is because I am just always fascinated how many young adults have no idea what a newspaper is. They don't know what a newspaper is. They don't know why a newspaper is a good source, and they don't know how that information is vetted. So I'm just going to start with, these are two of my favorite quotes. I know Thomas Jefferson had issues with the press sometimes, but he did believe that it was the best instrument for enlightening the mind of man. And we do know that newspapers as a living textbook are a great way to connect history as well as current events to all kinds of different lessons. this is just a little definition about journalism. One of the reasons I bring this up is because it seems as though in our world of social media, a lot of people consider themselves journalists, even though they're not professional journalists. So that's okay, except it's important to know that journalism's first obligation is to the truth and that there is a discipline of verification. That doesn't mean that there's not things in the news that are manipulated or considered propaganda. But this is kind of the basic introduction of what journalism is. So in today's digital world, I'm always fascinated by this. When I talk to my students and I ask them where they get their news, their first answer is always social media. And when I ask them what social media, they tell me what? What do you think? TikTok, yes. TikTok is a big one, and Instagram. So my question is always, if you're getting your information from Instagram and TikTok, how do you know if the information is accurate, or how do you know what the main point is? And they always tell me they read the comments, which means they are not thinking, they're not interpreting on their own, they're not looking for credible sources, and they are just assuming what the rest of the people on that thread assume. Oops. So as you all know, um, primary sources are a great way to get students to be engaged actively in their classrooms. And I think the idea of calling a newspaper a living textbook is very appropriate because we use the newspaper as a basis for all kinds of conversations, from social studies to science to health. I think that it has a lot of variety in the classroom. Right now in Florida, there is a big push for civic education. And I'm not sure how that is around the rest of the nation. I'm guessing it's probably up there in priorities. But of course, the newspaper is a great way to know what's going on around the world, around your neighborhood, I mean. Yeah. Excuse me. So as a primary and secondary source, the newspaper is an optimal tool to engage students. It's also a great way to get them to learn about different perspectives. A lot of K-12 students are isolated. So that means that they're kind of living in their own little neighborhoods. They go to school with the same people. They go to church with the same people. Their parents have similar viewpoints. So learning more about what's going on regionally as well as nationally and globally is a prime use for the newspaper. This is just something I pulled off Pew Research. When it comes to political news, 70% of young adults say they get it because they happen to come across it, as opposed to 30% who actually seek it out. So when I remember when I was in school, I always I heard news from other people, but I didn't actually do the research on my own. So whatever the presiding point of view was the one that I would get that information from. Adults under 30 are much more likely to get their news on social media, which we already talked about. And then, although young adults follow the news less closely than any other age group, those young people tend to consume more news. And that's always an interesting thing because they're getting it again from maybe unreliable sources. They are getting it from AI. They are getting it from social media, and they're getting it from word of mouth. One of the things that we stress when we're talking about using the newspaper as an educational resource is the idea of what news literacy is. And we're back to that whole reliability and credibility. One of the things that's always interesting is that even if a student is getting their news from a web source, if that news has come from a report, some sort of printed report, it's usually a little more reliable than if it's just somebody speaking off the top of their head. And we're going to talk about why in a few minutes. So these are some of the key questions that we always ask when we're talking about news literacy. Who made the message? Who paid for it? What important information is left out? Is it verifiable? When my students do research, when my college students do research, one of the things we always talk about is the whole who paid for this information. So if a report, a study was being done by a specific think tank, then somebody paid for that think tank to come up with that information. Also, when you're looking in social media and that sort of thing, you kind of have to look at the whole who might be benefited or who might be harmed by this. So this is, I don't know why I can't get rid of this little thing. Let me try to move it. Okay. So this is just an example of 1, 2, 3, 4 different publications that we have at Times Publishing Company. We have an actual physical newspaper. We have the digital edition of the newspaper, and then we also have some weekly newspapers. So, and most of you already know that using the newspaper is a great tool to help students develop writing, reading, and thinking skills, as well as learning more about their communities. Again, we talked a little bit about civic education. One of the things, and I think I have this on another slide, but one of the things that research has found that people who read a newspaper on a regular basis are more involved in their communities. They're more actively engaged, and they also vote more. So just a little background, newspaper and education is an effort between schools and the newspaper to promote the use of newspapers in print and electronic form as educational resources. At the Times, we provide both. If you are not in our immediate delivery area, though, obviously we would be providing the digital edition. One of the things I've learned about college students is they are very adaptable to that. High school students as well. They like to be able to pull something up on their phone. They like to be able to pull it up on their tablet as opposed to just having the print version available. A lot of newspapers around the world, not just the nation, provide free access of their newspapers for classroom use, as we do as well. As long as the newspaper and our lessons are being used in the classroom, there is no charge for parents, educators, community students, all that kind of stuff. Okay, I talked about this a little bit about students becoming more engaged voters. They also do better on standardized tests. And the reason that is because most standardized tests today are focusing on informational text. So whether we're talking about a civics test in middle school, or we're talking about the SATs, or we're talking about a bar exam, all of those things are going to include informational text. You guys are, it looks like most of you are working in libraries. I'm just going to look real quick. So, and archivists, and we have, okay, so we have, oops, sorry. We have a selection of people in the audience. What is going on here? Oh no, I've lost my, wait a minute. I've lost my, let's go backwards. There we go. Okay. So, sorry about that. I was on this slide. Okay. So you know that newspapers are a cost-effective way of using primary sources in the classroom. Newspapers are both a primary and a secondary source. They help students build vocabulary. They help improve reading skills. They are a great tool for research. You all know, so I'm not going to go over this, but you all know what primary sources and secondary sources are. The fact that the newspaper has both of those is a great way to engage students in being able to do comparison contrast, cause and effect, that sort of thing. Um, so I am going to just show this real quickly. Informational text, which is a big focus in our K through 12 schools, includes all of these points that are in the newspaper. Sometimes people forget that it's not just the articles. We're talking about advertisements, we're talking about letters, we're talking about images. I just completed working on a project it was a curriculum supplement focusing on Florida during the Revolutionary War period. And it's fascinating to me to go back and look at the advertisements from newspapers during that time period. Also, since Florida wasn't actually part of the 13 colonies, it's interesting that one of the reasons that Florida wasn't as engaged is because they didn't really have a newspaper. The closest newspaper would have been I believe, in the Carolinas during that time period. So these are one of the reasons I like this picture is because of the way this was actually laid out by our news department. So this is actually showing two different um, an abortion clinic on one side and a pregnancy center on the other side. And because it's laid out the way it is, it's a great way to show students the idea of comparison contrast. It's also newspapers. I find that I love using it with my students talking about cause and effect. So, of course, the main points are the who, what, where, when, why, and often how of what's going on in the article. Once students can kind of break that down into parts, they can get a better handle on what information is being given to them. So we're going to do a little activity. So this photo is one that was given to me by somebody who's in the photo, actually. Tell me what you see in the photo. What kind of stuff do you notice? Thickness of clothes. Okay, what does that tell us? Thickness of clothes might indicate the temperature, right? Dirty outerwear, so they might be workers. Okay. What else do you see? The caps, yes. Solidarity, that is a really interesting one. And that is shown in the fact that they are kind of all huddled together and also that they are touching each other. What else do you notice? Yes, everyone is white. So the fact that everyone is white and the fact that they are dressed this way and the fact that the photo is in black and white gives us an idea of time period. What kind of time period do we have? Depression, late 19th century, early 30s, 40s. Okay. And what about the fact that they're smiling? I like that someone picked up on that. What does that tell us? Okay. Faster camera shutter speed. What else? More casual setting. Okay. That's true. Smiling was the norm in photographs. So interestingly enough, is that Patrice? That is a great point. Someone was sent to document them. So these gentlemen are in the military. They are all prisoners of war, and they are in a Korean prisoner of war camp. And the reason they're smiling is because they were told to smile so that the United States would see this and see that their prisoners of war were being treated well. So it's all about context. If you don't know this picture comes from the Korean War, if you don't know that these guys were all soldiers, the idea that they're wearing these bulky jackets, yes, that does indicate temperature, but also you can't really see their bodies. So we don't know if they're malnutrition. We don't know if they've been starved, all that kind of thing. So, when you're looking at photos, especially in newspapers, it's interesting to see what it shows you without the context. This is another one of my favorite photos. This is actually from the New York Times. And let's see how perceptive you are. What do you think is going on? Where is this, first of all? Asia? Ah, yes, there are so many bikes. Is that why you think it's Asia? Because there are so many bikes? India? Okay, so again, perception. So we seem to have, there's a lot of bikes here and there's a lot of people. And you probably can't see this that well on the screen, but the people are all have cell phones. So it's actually a more modern photo than you might think at first. And yes, the elephant does have two tranquilizer darts in his butt. So what happened here was the elephant got out of a reserved area um, in India, and they had to tranquilize it to bring him back to the reserve area. But the interesting thing is, again, when you're talking to students, the fact that we have people, the people are running up the stairs, but it also seems to be some sort of shopping center because we have brand names up there. I am impressed with the gentleman who is wearing the kerchief in the front because he's awfully close, and I would not be that close to a stampeding elephant. And of course, cartoons are another great way to talk about current events and historical events. This is actually a cartoon called The Good Samaritan that was from the 1940s, talking about involvement of other countries regarding the Holocaust. Okay, so I'm just going to show you going to show you a few different ways that the newspaper can be used. One of them is basically to kind of have students interpret what can be learned by something that's in the newspaper. So, whether you're talking about historical newspapers or current newspapers, there's always some sort of lesson there. Whether we're talking about learning about history, or if we're talking about current events, court decisions, government decisions. So, one of the things I always like to do is kind of when I'm first starting with my students, I give them kind of a blanket look in the newspaper and see what kind of lessons you can learn. It can be a sports article, it can be a political article, it can just be something talking about everyday life. Here's another one. When I was, I don't teach literature as much these days as I used to, but I love comparing literature to what's going on in the stories. I mean, in the news, because a lot of times students see literature as this has nothing to do with reality. They shouldn't read because, nobody's going to ask them in 10 years from now what Macbeth's purpose was. But and Shakespeare is a great example for this. When you look through any kind of literature, there's always a connection to the time period. You need to know what was happening during that time period to be able to get across the author's purpose. Another one is basically having them just think about themselves, finding something that intrigues them. It could be a photograph, it could be a advertisement, it can be a opinion piece, it can be anything. But again, it's the idea is to get them to critically analyze what's going on around them. Fact and opinion is another great idea for talking about the newspaper in the classroom. A lot of times students will tell me when I'm talking about the Tampa Bay Times, they'll say, well, everything in there is opinion. And I'm like, okay, so let's examine the article and make that decision. And usually they come up with the idea that the articles are actually based on fact, not opinion. Oftentimes it's the placement of the article that indicates opinion. So I noticed there were a couple of people from New York. So if the Yankees do something incredible, they're going to be on the front page of that newspaper. Whereas here it would be the Tampa Bay Rays. So the idea of being able to decide what is credible and what is not credible is very helpful. And some of the research I've done using historical newspapers, it's also interesting to remember the region and who is telling the story. Because most of the time when we're looking at history books, we're looking at a story that is being told by the victor. Whoever won that side of the disagreement or war is going to be where the opinion comes from. But when you go back and you look at newspapers, a lot of times you see both sides of that. But again, you have to be a little careful because, for example, during the Revolutionary War, the king of propaganda would have been Benjamin Franklin, and he owned a printing press. So a lot of the information that was out there, he put out there on purpose to sway the citizens, they weren't citizens, but the American point of view. Oops. Blackout poetry is another great thing to do with newspapers. This is great, especially for younger kids. If they can build a poem looking for keywords, key headlines in a newspaper. There's a really great website talking about blackout poetry where they kind of give you instructions on how to build those. So it helps with creativity. Analyzing conflicts, of course, creating stories. One of the things that a lot of times I'll talk about with students going back to the idea of fiction is that a lot of times fictional stories are based on real things that happened. Right now, I am in the process of writing, putting together interviews from World War II soldiers. And when they tell their stories, they're not really in chronological order because, as you can imagine, something that happened 80 years ago is kind of hard to put into chronological order. They just have kind of snapshots. So Tim O'Brien is a great example of that in his books. He uses some exaggeration, but he uses a lot of real life experiences from the Vietnam War to base his stories. And of course, connecting the past to the present. So regardless of what a student is researching or writing about, it's always good to show that comparison. One of the weirdest comparisons that I have discovered, I did 2 years ago, I wrote a curriculum supplement focusing on genocide. And then last year, I did one on the Holocaust. And when you look at the symptoms of each, when you look at the symptoms of what happened during the Holocaust, you can see the same things happened in Cambodia and Yugoslavia, and Serbia, and in Rwanda. And then when I talked to Holocaust survivors, they were saying that a lot of times they see the newspaper and it panics them because what's going on in the world today mimics some of the stuff that they've seen in the past. So again, learning context, talking about the idea of connecting the past to the present. Rhetoric is another great thing to look at for the newspaper. There's all kinds of rhetoric. It can be anything from just logic to talking about emotions. I love using ads in the newspaper for this as well, because obviously ads and advertorials, both of those are focused on the idea that they're trying to appeal to something. So either it is a bottle of Coca-Cola that is going to quench your thirst and make you happy for the rest of your life, or whether it is a sneaker that will fix all your foot problems. They're all very important. I talked about this before, compare and contrast, propaganda. We see, so working on the World War II piece and working on the Holocaust piece, I've seen a lot of outrageous propaganda. But when I was doing the work on the Revolutionary War, a lot of that is interesting too, because when you're looking at newspapers from that time period, you don't necessarily think of it as propaganda, but sometimes that is actually what the goal is. So, in Florida, we actually have maps that are based on propaganda. I'm not sure if that's true in the rest of the country, but it's an interesting take. Point of view. Point of view is really important when we're talking about photos as well. When young people actually, when anybody is looking at a photo on Instagram or TikTok, they have no idea what happened before, they have no idea what's happening after, and they have no idea what's happening around it. So all you're seeing is one perspective of what is going on. Okay, so we talked about that. Newspapers as recorded history is so interesting to me. I don't know why this is doing this. Okay, so newspaper archaeology, this is a really fun activity that we've done with a couple of different of our projects. One of the great ways to examine that is through advertisement. We actually had a situation, we did a publication on the history of chocolate, and we had to be really careful about the advertisements that were in there, because in many cases, people were trading merchandise for people. So advertisements are very, looking at newspaper archaeology, and especially advertisements, is a great way to kind of decide what's going on in the world. On a lighter subject, I'm working on an anniversary publication with a Tampa theater that is now 100 years old. And the advertisements are fascinating from that time period. I have gone back and forth looking at not only the advertisements from the theater, but also the companies near the theater. They wanted to show that they were pro theater, so people would go to the theater and then come over there and eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner after watching the movies. Okay, so before I dive into and show you a little bit more about the actual newspaper, I just wanted to talk about our curriculum supplements. We have a whole bunch of those, and I'm going to show you where those are. One of the things, these are a couple of things we focus on: artifacts, newspaper articles, photos, and oral histories. And all of that is actually on this cover. So we have the violin as an artifact, we have the star, which is an artifact, we have photos, we have newspaper articles, we have cartoons, all of that is represented. And it gives you an idea of what was going on during the time period. Primary source documents, exploring the Declaration of Independence. A lot of times, students cannot, well, anybody has difficulty reading the cursive that was written during that time period. But the idea of kind of taking it apart and maybe looking at current events and showing that connection is really important. Oral histories, I did a publication focusing on the anniversary of, I think it was the 70th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education. And I spoke to people who were either teaching during that time in Florida or they were students during that time. And this particular woman was in middle school, and she chose, to her parents' unhappiness, to integrate a school in the area. And they were very worried that it was dangerous. But the reason she did that was because of the photo that you see on the left there. She saw her and her friends stood on Kennedy Boulevard and saw President Kennedy come down there saying, and she remembers him saying, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And that's what made her at middle school age decide that she was going to desegregate. This is just another example of some artifacts. This is a list of items that were in, I think this was our history of chocolate piece, yes. A list of items. We have ledgers, letters, timelines, all of that kind of stuff. Again, gives students a more rounded idea of what's going on in the time period. We did a piece focusing on democracy and what democracy is like today. And of course, the comparison is important, showing what was going on in the 1960s, what is going on today, how students are expressing themselves now. Just before we started, we talked a little bit about the difference between student newspapers back in the day. And I remember in my student newspaper, we had to cut and paste and use, I think we used rubber cement to put down the print pages. And then of course today most of that is online. And also at various school districts around the nation, there is still some censorship when it comes to what students can say. So it's interesting to look at the different points of view. These are just some ideas. Again, if you were going to use this for students, asking them to do some critical reading. What is the basis for something that happened, like this milestone decision? Understanding what the context was, the time period was. One of the things that fascinates me about this is how young that girl is. Linda Brown was just a little girl, and people acted like she was destroying the entire country. These are more examples of photographs. This is from our Holocaust publication. We also have some newspaper articles, as you can see here as well. Artifacts that I mentioned that we have a star up here that you probably can't see. This is a stamp from Auschwitz. This is a photo of the survivor's family. And interestingly enough, this is a photo of the survivor's family now. And she was talking about this is why she feels that Hitler didn't succeed, because her whole family, multiple generations, are here today. More artifacts, maps. Maps in the newspaper, as well as using them as artifacts, are a great way to get an idea of what was going on in the world. The idea that Florida was broken up into two areas. The reason that it was important to George Washington was basically because of the areas and because of the Caribbean and the closeness to Cuba. Okay, so this is the website. I'm just going to show you this real quick, and then I'm going to actually pull up our website. This is the Florida Press Educational Services website. If you are looking for a specific newspaper in your area, we do have a list of members on here. This is our newspaper and education website, which I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes. And then I am going to, I think I'm just gonna, yeah. So let me stop sharing and switch to, see if I can do this seamlessly. I get confused where their share button is on Teams versus Zoom. Okay, so this is our website. It's tampabay.com/NIE, and it actually goes to an external website, but that's the easiest way to get it. And I'm just going to show you a couple of things on here. The first is the digital newspaper. So when you click on login here, it's going to ask you for a email address and a password, which, oops, if you are interested in getting this, I will be happy to send you. And then the newspaper itself is the regular newspaper. So if I make this, if I turn it like this, we can look at it as, oh, I think my thing isn't like, the pages will turn like a regular newspaper. You can click on an article and be able to read it. You can actually translate that article into Spanish. And there's also an audio component. So if you're working with people, students or adults who struggle with being able to read, they can listen to the article at the same time they're reading it. This is like I said, this is the traditional newspaper. The Tampa Bay Times puts out a daily newspaper 7 days a week. We only print 2 days a week, though. So of course you can see there's advertisements, there's photos, there's text. The advertisements were all over the place. There are we have our viewpoint section. There are classifieds, obituaries, all that kind of stuff that gives context into the community. So this, let's see if I can do this without. Oh, okay. So another thing that's really good about this is there's this little tiny file box up here that you can click that will show the last 2 months archives. There is also a little search feature that you can go ahead and put in keywords and it will go beyond those 2 months. So I use this tool a lot with my students to explain to them how to research something. So for example, if I decided I was just going to put in the word raise here, it is going to show me way too many articles. Especially if I put in specific dates, and that is because the Rays are our baseball team. But if I'm looking for something specific, like maybe climate change, I can put it in quotation marks. Oh, and only one came up. I might be in the current editions. Let's see if I'm in the current editions. Yes. So if you hit all editions, obviously you're going to get more feedback. So the search feature is a great tool to have. There's also a little index here where you can choose what sections you want to look at. There's also a download, so you can actually download an article or the entire page or the entire newspaper to be able to save them. So if you were teaching about, if you wanted to talk about the election news, you might want to save this article on David Jolly so that you could do it when you're doing that unit. Another, I think I showed you, there's also, where did it go? Don't see the email feature, but oh, there's a clipping feature as well that you can clip something specific instead of doing the whole page. Okay, let's see if it'll let me go back. It will not. Okay, so I think I have to stop sharing again. Let me go back. Oops, I lost my window. Let's see. That is not where I wanted to be. Let's see if it'll go back to my website. Oh, sorry. Wrong website. Okay, are we all seeing my website now?
Yes, I
Or
can
is
see
it
it.
still on the, what was that?
Yeah, I can see the nieonline.com
Okay,
slash
excellent.
three
Thank you.
tabs.
So, some of the things I was just showing you, the curriculum supplements are listed under curriculum. If you click on social studies, for example, all of these were created by us. They all adhere to the Florida standards, which I know most of you are not in Florida, but Common Core and Florida standards are very close. We have everything from talking about diverse cultural heritage to um, um, segregation, to the Holocaust. Celebrate Freedom is a focus on the Declaration of Independence. Um, we also have, this was another piece that we did on wars. Here's the piece on the Forgotten Front. One of the things that I was going to show you on this one is that we do have a whole section talking about newspapers in the American Revolution. So newspapers have obviously throughout history have focused on the importance of sharing information. And of course, this down here, this Join or Die, is the first political cartoon that Benjamin Franklin published. So just to give you kind of a brief overview, curriculum supplements are all broken down by subject levels. Weekly lesson plans are focusing on different aspects of, I don't know why that is blocked out, but we have a cartoons with the classroom. We have news videos that focus on um, videos and discussion questions. And then we also have this Use the News that has basically prompts, discussion prompts, writing prompts to talk about different subjects, and it's broken down by grade level. So what I just clicked on was 9 through 12, but we also have middle school and elementary school. And all of that is here. So if you are interested in the newspaper and education program, if you happen to be in Florida, you can click on the sign up here button. But if not, I'm going to give you my contact information and I will see how many of you would like to have access to see if I'm going to do just one username and password. But signing in will be pretty seamless. If you are, for example, if you are working in a library, we have a lot of media specialists in our school system that will sign up for a whole bunch of licenses so that students can use it anytime they want to. So that is available to you. So let me go back now to my PowerPoint. Okay. Oops. You don't need that. Let's try that. Okay. So here's some more great resources for online newspapers. I'm sure most of you know these. Chronicling America is a great site. They have just updated that recently. So it is now by category. The annotated newspaper site is another really good site. Newspapers.com is a wonderful site. I always fall into the rabbit hole when I go on there and get too involved in it. But unfortunately, that one is not a free resource. The museum also has some free resources. Purdue University Free Historic U.S. Newspapers is by state. And the Morse Institute Library U.S. Historical Newspaper Collections is also there. And then, of course, we have the Library of Congress Cartoon Archives, which is a great source for, again, talking about context, talking about time period, having people do some critical thinking. So I'm going to put my contact information up here. If you are interested in me sending you the links from the PowerPoint, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to post the PowerPoint actually and send you a link to that if you would like to have more information. If you are interested in getting access to the Tampa Bay Times online, email me and I will make sure that you have a username and password. If you are planning to use it for the way the digital edition works is each license is for the number of people who will access it at the same time. So I tell teachers that if they're using it with a class of 25, then they would probably want 26 licenses. If they're just doing it on they're going to put it up on a presentation board, then they just need one. If they're going to assign it for homework, then they need to think about how many students are going to do it at the same time. For my college classes, I always give it for homework. I want the students to be able to take the time to actually go through the newspaper instead of me saying, okay, you have to pick this specific article. Questions?